Hi, welcome to Reading Between the Lines. I'm your host, the Water Dog. Thanks for tuning in to our second episode. Today we're going to be looking at the discipline of Obfuscate. So if you've got a crypt built primarily around that discipline, I'm going to be showing you some cards that you can utilize in your library. Now some of these cards are going to be very, very popular. They've been used over and over and over again. But some of these cards are not used as quite often as I think that they should. So I think that you're missing some opportunity by not using these cards, and we're going to kind of discuss and explain why. So let's have a look at that first card. Our first card is Old Friends. It comes from the Keepers of Tradition set back in 2008. Currently, there's only 26 decks that have used that card in the tournament winning decks. What it basically goes through is it has a cost of 1 blood. Do not replace until your next unlock phase. At the inferior, only usable during a bleed action. It's +1 bleed, very limited. And then at the superior, only usable during the polling step of a political action. This vampire gets +2 votes. Now, I like Old Friends specifically when I'm doing what I would call my traditions deck. I have a Camarilla traditions deck where you play with most of the traditions. But there's another card in there that I use in my tradition deck, which is called the Judgment Camarilla Segregation. I love that card. Being able to do damage to everybody who doesn't have a Camarilla vampire is very, very good. But if you're using Obfuscate as your primary discipline, because all of my princes and all of my Justicars, they all have superior Obfuscate, then I like this card because number one, I get the +1 bleed, so I'm not relying on dominate and I'm not relying on presence, okay? To get these bleeds, I'm basically going to use the inferior of Old Friends. And the other thing is I get the +2 votes, so I don't have to worry about having presence for bewitching oration and so forth and so on. So I like this card in my deck, especially for if Obfuscate is my primary discipline, and I'm going to be using some sort of votes. Okay, and if I need to get the extra bleed. So I think Old Friends is a very, very good card in a primary Obfuscate deck. Our second card is Confusion of the Eye. Now, Confusion of the Eye came out in 2005 with Kindred Most Won It. There are currently 56 decks in the TWD database that uses this card. At the inferior, you reduce a younger vampire's or an ally's bleed against you by 1. At the superior, only usable during a referendum before any votes are cast. Not usable on a referendum that is automatically passing. If the referendum requires a titled vampire, the referendum fails. Otherwise, the referendum continues, but the acting vampire cannot cast any votes in this referendum. And that's what I like about it right there. The referendum continues, but the active vampire cannot cast any votes in this referendum. So one of the things I really appreciate about the Confusion of the Eye is as a reaction, it shuts down vote decks to a certain degree. So let's say, for example, if they're going to want to use Parity Shift against you, which is a big card in most vote decks, is a Parity Shift card, right? Well, that requires a titled vampire. So if they use that, that vote fails, okay? Because if in that referendum requires a titled vampire, the referendum fails. So I love that aspect. The other thing is if the referendum continues and it's not a requiring a titled vampire, that vampire that called the vote doesn't get the votes. He can't use his votes in the referendum. So this is a very good card. I like that aspect of it because to me it's better than delayed tactics, okay? Especially if you're playing Obfuscate. So to me, if you're playing Obfuscate, this is a great card. Now let's just say you're not facing a vote deck. You're facing a bleed deck. Well, at the inferior, you can reduce a younger vampire or an ally's bleed against you by 1. So that's another big benefit of having this card. I think Confusion of the Eye is one of those cards that should get more play, especially in today's 5th edition that we're looking at, because we are seeing a lot more allied decks. We are seeing a lot more voting because there are a lot more titles, especially amongst those Anarch Baron decks that we're seeing a lot of. And so I think a card like this is a very useful card because you're going to see decks like Ministry decks and Malkavian decks and Nosferatu decks that you can utilize this card in those decks. So I like Confusion of the Eye. Our third card is what I would call a water dog card because a lot of people don't play with this card at all, and it's called Quick Exit. Okay, it came out in the Sabat set in 1996, so it's a very old card. If you look at the tournament winning database, it's only been in 5 decks. Okay, it has a companion piece in Auspex, which is Red Intentions. So both those cards do the same thing. In fact, Red Intentions is in 19 decks. But here we go. At the inferior, it's press only usable to end combat, and at the superior, it's strike dodge. So once again, if I'm playing a heavily Obfuscate deck, okay, especially if I'm playing like a bleed deck, and of course, then that means that you're going to probably have, what I would call combat decks that are going to come after you. Let's say they're going to come after you with a deep song. Well, you've got to have a way, if you're playing with an Obfuscate deck, to try to avoid taking serious damage in that combat. So number one is at the superior you can dodge. Okay. The second thing is at the inferior. Let's say you took 4 damage in the first round of combat, and you've got to get out of that combat. Okay. Well, at least now you can press because you have a press to end combat. So it gets you out of some of those other particular situations. And so I like Quick Exit. So for me, I usually put 2 of these in a deck. Okay. Now, if you're playing an Auspex deck, which is mainly an intercept deck, and you don't have a lot of combat cards, well, Red Intentions, I would play with a few more because I would probably play with about 4 of those cards in that deck. So I really like the idea of being able to end the combat with a press or to have a strike dodge, especially if I'm playing with vampires that are not really combat-oriented vampires. They're really action vampires. Okay. Quick Exit. Give it a shot. Our 4th card is Night Moves. Night Moves. Now, I love this card. And I'm amazed when I looked at the research on it that there is only 22 tournament winning decks that use Night Moves. And I don't understand why. Because to me, it is such a brilliant, brilliant card. It came out in the original, Jihad, 1994. And let's just kind of go through its abilities. First off, at the inferior, it's a direct bleed, your predator or prey, at +3 stealth. If more than 1 pool is bled with this action, ignore the excess. And at the superior, as above, but bleed at +6 stealth. Now, notice that you can bleed your predator or your prey. So number one, you could do either one. That's the first one. The second bonus is it's hard to block, okay? It is a card that is very hard to block. So at the +6 stealth, you are going to get that bleed, and that bleed is going to be successful. Now, why is that important to the water dog? Well, let me tell you why. Because I love cards that utilize the edge. I just love cards that utilize the edge. So I love it in enticement decks, inside dirt decks, off kilter, echo of harmonies, leverage, power-based Zurich. I love that card because it allows me to get the edge with ease. And if I can get the edge with ease and be able to do an inside dirt or to do an enticement or to do a leverage, okay, or power-based Zurich, which is a very underrated master card, all right, that's just, more for me. So I really think this is an undervalued card because when you first look at it, it's like, yeah, because you can only get 1 pull off the bleed. That's the downside that people look at, is that you can only get 1 pull off the bleed. The upside is you are almost guaranteed to get the edge. And having the edge in some specific decks, okay, like I said, like those off-kilter decks, like those, enticement decks, inside dirt decks, that's money in the bank. And whenever I'm playing decks like that, I like anywhere from 8 to 12 Night Moves easily in my deck. And just simply go get the edge and do damage. Because you got to remember that when you're playing this game, to me, you've got to have more than 1 win condition. So a lot of times when people just play, for example, a straight-on bleed deck, okay, and those bleeds start getting bounced around and so forth and so on, or they start getting reduced, you're not doing the damage you thought you were going to do, you get in trouble. So what's your alternative win condition? What are other ways that you're going to do damage? Well, sometimes, somebody at the table beside you is going to have vote lock. Well, enticement, inside dirt, off kilter, those type of things, they work very, very, very well. Okay, so I like Night Moves because it helps me set up an alternative win condition for my deck. So try some Night Moves. Our last card is an old standard. It is an old standard. It's Spy Mission. From the original Jihad in 1994, it's currently in 403 tournament winning decks. At the inferior, +1 stealth. At the superior, and this is where the money is, only usable if a bleed would be successful. Instead, the bleed burns no pool, is unsuccessful, and this card is put on this vampire. The next time this vampire is about to successfully bleed, the same Methuselah burned this card, and this vampire gets +2 bleed. So, my young players, we've talked about this before. If you go to bleed your prey and they decide they want to block, and so you then go to +2 stealth, let's say, and now the action's unblocked, and so then you pump up the bleed to a 5 bleed. All of a sudden then, they bounce that bleed over to your ally, where you're no longer hurting them, you're helping them, okay? So how do you avoid helping them, but also helping yourself in the future? Spy mission. That's the great thing about Spy Mission. Spy Mission is the best bounce bleed card deterrent out there, because not only are you not going to be hurting your ally, okay, but when your ally becomes your prey later on down the line, you've got a +2 bleed in the pocket. Spy Mission is a great card. If I'm playing Obfuscate bleed, I like anywhere from 4 to 6 Spy Missions in my deck. Somewhere around that number, 4 to 6, pretty easily. It's just a great card for that. Okay, don't forget at the inferior you still get a +1 stealth, so you can still use it for actions. But to be able to avoid having your bleed bounced over to your ally and protecting not only your ally, but also preserving a big bleed later on down the road, Spy Mission is money in the bank. That's it for Obfuscate. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Reading Between the Lines. I'll be back at it again. Once again, if you like what you've seen, please hit that subscribe button. This is the Water Dog. Y'all take care.